Fair enough. Let's crack this open and see what we've got. Picture a fortress, forged from the frozen guts of St. Petersburg, its walls rising like the jagged fangs of a beast that's devoured hope for over a century. This is Kresty Prison, a name that chills the blood, built with German precision to lock away the wicked and the desperate alike. Hundreds of thousands have passed through its gates, their dreams crushed under its weight. Yet only five audacious souls have ever slipped its iron grip in all that time. But in the humid haze of June 1991, a new contender stepped into its shadow. A man whose quiet cunning would soon turn those walls into a stage for a drama no one saw coming. His name was Yuri Propelkin, a lean 32-year-old with eyes like a hawk's, a thief with a history of slipping chains, now facing a charge that could end him. Murder, cold and deliberate. This isn't just a tale of escape. It's a chess game with death itself, and by the end, you'll be left wondering who's the king and who's the pawn. Stick with me, because the board's set, and I'm not revealing the checkmate just yet. Propelkin wasn't some fresh-faced rookie trembling at his first arrest. He'd been down this road before. Petty thefts that marked him as a recidivist, a daring breakout from a colony that earned him a whisper of legend among the underworld's underbelly. But this time, the dice rolled differently. Dragged into Kresty that summer, he carried a weight heavier than iron bars, a murder rap. It started with a burglary, his old trade, slipping into a friend's flat with the grace of a phantom, expecting an empty score. Instead, he found the man's mother, her presence a sudden wrench in his plans. Her screams tore through the silence, raw with terror. And in a heartbeat of panic, he silenced her with a clothesline rope, her life snuffed out like a guttering candle. With the cool precision of a seasoned pro, he wiped his prints, pocketed her belongings, and vanished into the night. Convinced the law had no thread to pull. He'd beaten the system before, why not now? But the system, that sly old fox, had a trick up its sleeve. The investigation peeled back his confidence like a flimsy curtain. Forensic experts, with their magnifying glasses and cold logic, found his fingerprints etched into the victim's neck. A mistake he hadn't factored in, a noose tightening with every tick of the clock. The courtroom loomed ahead, a guillotine disguised as justice, and with it, the promise of a death sentence. In 1990s Russia, the executioner's shadow wasn't a ghost story. It was a stark reality, a bullet with your name on it. Even if the noose spared him, decades in Kresty's suffocating depths awaited, a fate more terrifying than the gallows for a man who'd once tasted the wind on his face. Propelkin knew this place intimately. Its rules were carved in blood: survive by earning respect, or be ground to dust by those who already had it. Slight and reserved, he wasn't the type to command with brute force. His past escapes flickered like a distant fire, a hint of notoriety that felt like a whisper in a storm among the cell block's hardened wolves. Yet he remembered how a single bold move had once turned heads. Could it work again? The thought took root, embers smoldering in the dark, begging to be fanned into flame. Kresty wasn't some soft colony where guards turned a blind eye. Its security was a fortress within a fortress, barbed wire glinting like a predator's teeth under watchtowers, alarms that shrieked like harpies, guards with eyes that missed nothing. 5 successful escapes in a century mocked the odds, a statistic that taunted his every breath. To dream of being the 6th was madness, a gamble with odds stacked against him like a house of cards in a hurricane. But the alternative, waiting for a bullet or rotting in a cell, was a slow execution he couldn't stomach. Propelkin's mind, honed by his days as a sapper in the army, began to churn. Caution, foresight, a memory that cataloged every detail. These were his arsenal. During daily walks in the exercise yard, he studied the layout with a soldier's precision, his eyes mapping corridors that twisted like a labyrinth, guard posts that shifted with mechanical rhythm. Their personalities, some lazy, some razor-sharp, becoming pieces on his mental chessboard. But the deeper he delved, the more the task loomed like a mountain. Too many variables, too many eyes. Could he bend this iron world to his will? Or was he chasing a mirage in the snow? Then came a crack in the armor, a sliver of hope born from routine. During a so-called investigative experiment, a trip outside his cell for some legal charade, his sharp gaze caught a flaw. Cell block 945, his new home, perched at the prison's edge, its rooftop exercise yard brushing against a residential building beyond the walls. A rare design quirk, barbed wire the only barrier, and if it wasn't electrified, a leap to freedom might be possible. His pulse quickened, a drumbeat of possibility. This was his thread, a lifeline in a sea of despair. But one man against Kresty's might was a suicide pact waiting to happen. He needed allies, men as cornered as he was, yet pliable enough to follow his lead. The cell held 24 souls, a volatile mix of thieves, killers, and shattered dreams. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. A snitch could trade his plans for a softer cot, a warmer meal. His gaze settled on Vladislav Zelenev, a 20-year-old with a rap sheet that read like a horror novel. Murder among them, facing his own death sentence. Zelenev had killed an authority in a prior stint, making a return to general population a death warrant of its own. Perfect. Nothing to lose and a will to follow if steered right. Then there was Yuri Shapranov, 25, a robust ex-robber who'd stormed into cell 945 and seized control within days. His presence a thunderclap that silenced the room. Perpelkin marked him too, sensing a leader he could guide from the shadows. But how to plant the seed without alerting the wrong ears? A snitch could unravel everything, bartering secrets for leniency from the guards. Weeks bled into months, and Perpelkin's plans simmered, a silent storm brewing in his skull, waiting for the right moment to break. One night, fate dealt him a wild card. Lying awake, his sapper's ears caught a whisper slicing through the dark. Shapranov proposing an escape to Zelenev. His heart stuttered. A trap? A staged play to bait him into a confession? Only to hand him to the wardens for a pat on the back? He listened harder, the voices raw with intent, not artifice. Shapranov, the brash leader, and Zelenev, the doomed killer, were in earnest, their words a lifeline he hadn't expected. Perpelkin's mind ignited. If they were plotting, he could join, not as a follower, but as the architect, the mind behind the muscle. But how to prove his mettle to men who saw him as a mute shadow, a nobody in the pecking order? The answer struck during a meal distribution, a moment of calculated chaos. With feigned passion, he unleashed a tirade about the hellish conditions, his voice cracking with despair. Better a bullet from a guard's rifle than rotting in this living tomb, pitched loud enough for Shapranov's ears to catch. The act hit its mark. Shapranov's eyes narrowed, then softened with a nod of grudging respect, a crack in his armor. Soon, a cautious hint dropped. Join us. Perpelkin seized it, unveiling his rooftop escape plan, forged from weeks of observation, a blueprint etched in his mind. Shapranov's shock morphed into awe. The quiet sapper had just become the linchpin, a spider spinning a web from the shadows. A team began to coalesce, a fragile alliance forged in desperation. Perpelkin demanded discipline, transforming a loose band into a unit with a single heartbeat. Shapranov remained the face, the loud voice. But Perpelkin's mind pulled the strings, a puppeteer in the dark. Tools took shape in secret. Korolev, the craftsman, wove a rope ladder from tattered sheets, his fingers moving with the precision of a weaver under threat. Perpelkin, the sapper, molded bread grenades with a craftsman's care, each lump a potential savior. Shapranov and Zelenev sharpened shanks from boot insoles, their blades glinting in the dim light. Every move was a tightrope walk, every tool a prayer against discovery. A close shakedown nearly exposed them, controllers prowling like wolves, their eyes missing the ladder hidden under Korolev's clothes by a hair's breadth. The operation teetered on a knife's edge, saved by a heartbeat of luck. By mid-February, the plan was locked. 7 men, bound by the noose of their own fates, set to strike on the 23rd, a day chosen for its chaos. Perpelkin overheard guards murmuring about Avakumova's birthday, a distraction he planned to exploit. But would Kresty's iron jaws snap shut, or would they find a crack to slip through? That question hung like a guillotine, and Perpelkin wasn't about to let it fall yet. The clock was ticking, and with it, the pulse of a plan that could either free them or bury them deeper than the prison's foundations. The air in Kresty prison hung heavy, a mix of damp stone and unspoken tension, as February 1992 crept toward its climax. Yuri Perpelkin, the wiry sapper turned mastermind, felt the weight of his gambles settle into his bones. The plan was no longer a whisper in his mind. It was a living thing, pulsing with risk and promise, a coiled spring ready to snap. Kresty's walls, those unyielding sentinels of despair, had stood for over a century, knocking the dreams of the damned with their 5 legendary escapes. Now Perpelkin aimed to etch his name into that rare ledger, a 6th shadow to slip through the cracks. But the path ahead was a tightrope over abyss, and every step required precision, or it would all come crashing down. The question gnawed at him. Could he turn a ragtag crew into a machine of freedom, or would their ambition light a fuse to their own destruction? You're along for the ride, and I'm not tipping the scales yet. Let's see where this razor's edge takes us. The turning point came with a stroke of luck, a crack in Kresty's armor Perpelkin hadn't dared hope for. He'd overheard guards chatting in the corridors, their voices low but careless, revealing a golden nugget. February 23rd, Soviet Army Day, would coincide with Guard Avakumova's birthday. A celebration, however muted, could dull their edge, a distraction he could wield like a blade. The date was set, his team would strike then, banking on the element of surprise to pierce the prison's vigilance. But first, they needed to move like ghosts. Shaperknov, the bull-headed leader with a voice that could command a room, took charge of the morning walkout, his presence a shield for the plan's quiet architect. At 10:30, the 7 chosen men, Perpelkin, Shaperknov, Zelenev, Korolev, Fedorov, Zinovev, and Utkin, stepped into the exercise yard. Their faces masks of routine. Fedorov and Utkin, the rear guard, carried hidden shanks and bread grenades, their eyes scanning for the guard trailing behind. Lux smiled on the stairs. The controller lingered on the 2nd floor, leaving the path clear. A gift, perhaps, but gifts in Kresty often came with strings. Korolev, the craftsman with steady hands, watched the watchtower, his signal the linchpin. When the guard stepped away, he gave the nod, and the plan ignited. Shaperknov led the charge, a lion pouncing, as they overwhelmed the controller, a swift, silent takedown. Perpelkin snatched the key to the observation tower, his sapper's fingers trembling but sure, unlocking the door to the rooftop. The team dragged the unconscious guard into the yard, a puppet discarded, and raced upward. For a moment, freedom shimmered on the horizon. Barbed wire, the final hurdle, loomed ahead. But the gods of Kresty weren't done playing. A rooftop guard spotted them, his shout a crack of thunder, and the tower hatch slammed shut, sealing their fate. Seconds ticked away, precious and lost, as Perpelkin fumbled with the lock. Too late. The alarm wailed, a siren's cry that summoned the prison's wrath. The plan unraveled, but Perpelkin's mind didn't falter. Backup was his safety net. "Take the guards," he barked, pivoting to Plan B. They stormed the 2nd floor duty room, where controllers Alexander Aramsky and Valentina Avakumova sat unsuspecting. Fedorov, the least blooded of the crew, moved with chilling precision, pressing a shank to Avakumova's throat, his voice a low growl. "Don't move. This is an escape. You're hostages now." Shaperknov and Zelenev bound Aramsky, their movements a blur of desperation. Utkin and Korolev, armed with fake grenades, guarded the door, their bluff a fragile shield. The shift was seismic. Freedom had slipped, but leverage was theirs. Outside, the prison erupted, special forces mobilizing, their boots a drumbeat of doom. Perpelkin's heart raced. Had he miscalculated, or was this the chaos he banked on? A duty room became a crucible, a stage for a standoff that would test every nerve. Perpelkin, the silent strategist, dialed home, his voice steady as he told his mother to alert the press. A masterstroke to deter a bloodbath under public eyes. Shaprionov took the lead in negotiations, his voice booming through the window, to Colonel Alexander Kulikov, the man tasked with ending this. Weapons, vests, a car to the airport, and a plane out. Do it by 13:30 or they die. The demands hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Kulikov, a veteran with a poker face, listened, his mind racing. The clock ticked, each second a tightening noose. Perpelkin positioned Avakumova at the window. Fedorov's shank a constant threat, a visual to unnerve the negotiators. Arensky, under Perpelkin's grip, trembled, a second pawn in this deadly game. The prison yard transformed into a war zone, a command post springing up as Kulikov rallied the guard, police and prosecutors. Initial offers, leniency for surrender, were spat back, the team too deep to turn back. Moscow's voice crackled over the line, pressing for action, but Kulikov held firm, betting on a peaceful resolution. Yet the stakes rose when the crew found liquor in the room. Korolev, already drunk, became a wild card. His negotiations with his wife falling flat, Perpelkin's control wavered. Could he rein in this beast he'd unleashed? The tension coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap. Kulikov shifted tactics, appealing to Shaprionov's ego. Your fate, theirs, the hostages. It's in your hands. Lead them to safety, and you're the hero. Shaprionov hesitated, a crack in his bravado. But Perpelkin, sensing the shift, pulled him back, his whisper a command from the shadows. The power dynamic flickered, Shaprionov the face, Perpelkin the brain. Moscow's order to prepare a storm loomed. But the plan hit a snag. Prisoners in adjacent blocks, spotting snipers, signaled the escapees with shouts and gestures, turning the prison into a network of eyes. Perpelkin, ever alert, sent Zelenev to the window, his voice a warning. Back off, or blood spills. The bluff held, the storm paused, but for how long? The arrival of Shaprionov's mother added a human thread, her pleas a dagger to his resolve. Go, leave me, he shouted, but her tears lingered. Perpelkin, sensing weakness, pushed Utkin forward with a grenade, a final flex of muscle. The 13:30 deadline loomed, a guillotine's blade, and the yard fell silent, a prelude to chaos. Kulikov's hope teetered. Could he break them, or would this end in a massacre? The answer lay in the shadows, where Perpelkin's next move waited. A card yet unplayed. What would he do when the clock struck doom? The clock ticked toward 13:30, like a heartbeat counting down to oblivion. The air inside Kresty Prison's duty room, thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and the sharp tang of spilled liquor. Yuri Perpelkin stood in the shadows, his wiry frame a coiled spring, eyes glinting with a sapper's cold calculation as the world outside erupted into chaos. This wasn't just a breakout anymore. It was a siege, a high-stakes poker game where the chips were lives, and the pot was freedom. The fortress of Kresty, with its century-old walls and a legacy of only 5 escapes, had never seen a standoff like this, and Perpelkin, the quiet architect, held the reins tighter than anyone knew. Outside, Colonel Alexander Kulikov faced a dilemma that could define his career or end it, while the 7 escapees, led by the brash Yuri Shaprionov, turned a routine cell block into a battleground. But who's really calling the shots here? Stick with me, because the cards are still face down, and the next move could be a bluff or a bullet. The plan had spiraled from a rooftop dash to a hostage crisis in a heartbeat. Perpelkin's backup strategy, taking controllers Valentina Avakuma and Alexander Arensky, unfolded with ruthless precision. Fedorov, the least blooded of the crew, pressed a shank to Avakuma's throat, his voice a low growl that cut through the panic. Don't move. This is an escape. You're ours now. Shaprionov and Zelenev bound Arensky, their movements a blur of desperation, while Utkin and Korolev, clutching fake grenades, guarded the door like sentinels on a crumbling wall. The shift was seismic. Freedom had slipped, but leverage was their new currency. Outside, the prison yard transformed into a war zone, special forces boots pounding the ground, Their arrival a drumbeat of doom that echoed through the concrete. Perpelkin's pulse raced. Had he misjudged the odds, or was this the chaos he banked on to force Kulikov's hand? The duty room became a crucible, a stage where every glance and gesture carried weight. Perpelkin, the silent strategist, seized the moment, dialing his mother with a voice steady as steel, instructing her to tip off the press. A genius move. Cameras and microphones could deter a slaughter, turning the prison into a global stage. Shapounov took the lead, his voice booming through the window to Kulikov. Weapons, vests, a car to the airport, and a plane out by 13:30. Or they die. The demands hung like a guillotine's blade, a gauntlet thrown at the feet of a man, trained to negotiate, not capitulate. Kulikov, a veteran with a face carved from granite, listened, his mind a whirlwind of strategy. The clock's relentless march amplified the tension. Each tick, a tightening noose around both sides. Perpelkin positioned Avakumova at the window. Fedorov's shank, a constant threat, her trembling form a visual to unnerve the negotiators. Arinsky, gripped by Perpelkin's iron hand, shook like a leaf, a second pawn in this deadly chess match. A yard outside buzzed with activity, a command post sprouting like a war tent as Kulikov rallied the guard, police, and prosecutors. Initial offers, leniency for surrender, were spat back with contempt, the team too deep in the abyss to climb out. Moscow's voice crackled over the line, a distant overseer pressing for action, but Kulikov held firm, betting on a peaceful resolution. Yet the stakes soared when the crew stumbled upon liquor stashed in the room. Korolev, already half-drunk, became a wild card, his negotiations with his wife dissolving into slurred defiance. Perpelkin's control wavered. Could he rein in this beast he'd unleashed, or was the liquor a spark that would burn his plan to ash? The tension coiled tighter, a spring ready to snap, and the question lingered. Who would blink first? Kulikov shifted tactics, aiming for Shaponov's pride. Your fate, theirs, the hostages, it's in your hands. Lead them to safety, and you're the hero they'll remember. Shaponov hesitated, a crack in his bravado, his eyes flickering with doubt. Perpelkin, sensing the shift, pulled him back with a whisper, a command from the shadows that reasserted his grip. The power dynamic flickered. Shaponov, the loud figurehead, Perpelkin, the unseen brain. Moscow's order to prepare a storm loomed. A shadow over Kulikov's hopes, but the plan hit a snag. Prisoners in adjacent blocks, spotting snipers on the roofs, signaled the escapees with shouts and gestures, turning Kresty into a network of eyes and ears. Perpelkin, ever alert, sent Zelenev to the window, his voice a warning. Back off, or blood spills. The bluff held, the storm paused, but for how long? The prison was a living thing now, working against them as much as for them. The arrival of Shaponov's mother added a human thread, her pleas a dagger to his resolve. Go, leave me, he shouted. But her tears lingered, a tether to a life he might never reclaim. Perpelkin, sensing weakness, pushed Utkin forward with a grenade, a final flex of muscle to keep the pressure on. The 13:30 deadline loomed, a guillotine's edge, and the yard fell silent, a prelude to chaos that hung like a storm cloud. Kulikov's hope teetered. Could he break them with words? Or would this end in a massacre under the world's gaze? The press, summoned by Perpelkin's call, began to gather, their lenses a shield and a curse. But then a twist. Shaponov's voice faltered, and Perpelkin stepped closer, his whisper a blade, hold the line. Who was truly leading this dance? And what would happen when the music stopped? The standoff stretched, a taut wire ready to snap. Kulikov noticed a pattern. Shaponov's key statements came after stepping away, consulting someone deeper in the room. Perpelkin, the invisible hand, was pulling strings from the dark. Kulikov hadn't faced this level of cunning before, a mind so cool it chilled the blood. At 13:15, Omen reported ready for a storm, but fate threw a curveball. Prisoners' shouts alerted the escapees, forcing Perpelkin to adapt. He sent Zelenev to the window again, his tone a growl. Remove those ladders, or she dies. The bluff worked. The storm retreated, But the clock didn't stop. Kulikov masked the pause, keeping the pressure subtle, but the game was shifting. Perpelkin's next move loomed, a shadow over the negotiations. Would it be surrender or a final desperate play? The answer waited in the silence, a riddle wrapped in steel. The clock crawled toward 14:12, each second a hammer strike against the fragile hope clinging to the walls of Kresty Prison's duty room. Yuri Perpelkin, the wiry sapper-turned-puppet master, stood in the shadows, his breath steady despite the chaos swirling around him. A mind forged in war now orchestrating a prison break that teetered on the edge of glory or ruin. Outside, Colonel Alexander Kulikov faced a crucible of his own, the weight of command pressing down as special forces circled like vultures ready to strike. This wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a war of wills, a high-stakes showdown where every move could tip the scales toward freedom or a bloodbath. The fortress of Kresty, with its century-old legacy of only 5 successful breakouts, had never trembled like this. And Perpelkin, the unseen kingmaker, held a hand no one could yet read. Stick with me, because the tension's about to snap, and I'm keeping the final card close to my chest. The duty room had become a pressure cooker, its air thick with the sour reek of sweat and the faint burn of spilled liquor, a volatile mix that threatened to ignite at any moment. Perpelkin's backup plan, taking controllers Valentina Avakumova and Alexander Arensky as hostages, had shifted the game from a rooftop sprint to a nerve-shredding standoff. Fedorov, the least seasoned of the crew, pressed a shank to Avakumova's throat with a steadiness that belied his youth, his voice a low snarl. "Don't move, this is an escape, and you're ours." Shaparnov and Zelenev bound Aremsky with the efficiency of men who'd rehearsed this in their nightmares, while Utkin and Korolev, clutching fake grenades, guarded the door like sentinels on a crumbling rampart. The shift was seismic. Freedom had slipped through their fingers, but leverage was their new weapon. Outside, the prison yard buzzed with urgency, special forces boots pounding the ground, their arrival a drumbeat of impending doom that reverberated through the concrete. Perpelkin's heart raced, but his mind stayed ice-cold. Had he misjudged the odds, or was this the chaos he banked on to force Kulikov into a corner? The room was a stage, every glance and gesture a play for survival. Perpelkin, the silent strategist, had already played a masterstroke, dialing his mother with a voice like forged steel, instructing her to alert the press. Cameras and microphones could turn this into a global spectacle, a deterrent to a massacre under watchful eyes. Shaparnov took the lead, his voice booming through the window to Kulikov. Weapons, vests, a car to the airport, and a plane out. By 13:30, here they die. The demands hung like a guillotine's blade, a challenge hurled at a man trained to negotiate, not yield. Kulikov, his face a mask of granite, listened, his mind a storm of tactics. The clock's relentless march amplified the tension, each tick a noose tightening around both captors and captives. Perpelkin positioned Avakumova at the window, Fedorov's shank a constant threat, her trembling form a silent plea to the negotiators. Aremsky, gripped by Perpelkin's iron hand, shook like a leaf, a second pawn in this deadly chess match, his eyes darting for an escape that wasn't there. The yard outside had morphed into a war zone, a command post springing up like a battlefield tent as Kulikovs rallied the guard, police, and prosecutors. Initial offers, leniency for surrender, were spat back with scorn, the team too far gone to retreat. Moscow's voice crackled over the line, a distant overseer pressing for blood, but Kulikov held firm, betting on words over weapons. Yet the stakes soared when the crew unearthed liquor in the room. Korolev, already half-drunk, became a loose cannon, his slurred defiance during negotiations with his wife a crack in the facade. Perpelkin's control wavered. Could he leash this beast he'd unleashed, or would the liquor torch his carefully laid plans? The tension coiled tighter, a spring wound to breaking, and the question loomed: who would crack first? Kulikov shifted his approach, targeting Shaparnov's pride. Your fate, theirs, the hostages, it's in your hands. Lead them to safety and you're the hero they'll sing about. Shaparnov hesitated, a fissure in his bravado, his eyes flickering with doubt under the weight of command. Perpelkin, sensing the shift, pulled him back with a whisper, a command from the shadows that reasserted his grip. The power dynamic flickered. Shaparnov the loud figurehead, Perpelkin the unseen brain. Moscow's order to prepare a storm loomed, a shadow over Kulikov's hopes. But the plan hit a snag. Prisoners in adjacent blocks, spotting snipers on the roofs, signaled the escapees with shouts and gestures, turning Kresty into a web of eyes and ears working against the plan. Perpelkin, ever alert, sent Zelenev to the window, his voice a warning, "Back off, or she dies." The bluff held, the storm paused, but the prison was alive now. A double-edged sword that could save or doom them. Shaparnov's mother arrived, her pleas a human thread woven into the steel of the standoff. "Go, leave me," he shouted. But her tears lingered, a tether to a life he might never reclaim, her voice cracking with a mother's love. Perpelkin, sensing weakness, pushed Utkin forward with a grenade, a final flex to keep the pressure on. The 13:30 deadline loomed, a guillotine's edge, and the yard fell silent, a prelude to chaos that hung like a storm cloud. Kulikov's hope teetered. Could he break them with words, or would this end in a massacre under the world's gaze? The press, summoned by Perpelkin's call, began to gather, their lenses a shield and a curse, amplifying the stakes. But then, a twist. Shaparnov's voice faltered, and Perpelkin stepped closer, his whisper a blade. "Hold the line." Who was truly leading this dance, and what would happen when the music stopped? The standoff stretched, a taut wire ready to snap. Kulikov noticed a pattern. Shaparnov's key statements came after stepping away, consulting someone deeper in the room. Perpelkin, the invisible hand, was pulling strings from the dark, a mind so cool it chilled the blood. Kulikov hadn't faced this level of cunning before, a strategist hiding in plain sight. At 13:15, Oman reported ready for a storm, but fate threw a curveball. Prisoners' shouts alerted the escapees, forcing Perpelkin to adapt. He sent Zelenev to the window again, his tone a growl. "Remove those ladders, or she dies." The bluff worked. The storm retreated, but the clock didn't stop. Kulikov masked the pause, keeping the pressure subtle, but the game was shifting. Perpelkin's next move loomed, a shadow over the negotiations. Would it be surrender, or a final desperate play? The arrival of Shaparnov's mother had stirred the pot, her tears a crack in his armor. But Perpelkin's counter was swift. He pushed Utkin to the window with a grenade, a visual threat to keep Kulikov on edge. The 13:30 deadline passed in a hush, a moment of truth that hung like a held breath. Then a new player emerged, Zinovev, leaning out to bid farewell to fellow inmates, his voice a theatrical cry that rang with desperation. In the command post, Kulikov seized the moment. This wasn't a coordinated front, it was a fractured crew, their plan unraveling. Perpelkin, sensing the shift, forced Shaparnov back to the window, his voice a snarl. "If you storm us, her blood's on you." The threat was real, the shank at Avakumova's throat a constant reminder. But who was the real threat? Shaparnov's bravado or Perpelkin's silence? Kulikov's mind raced. He'd pegged Shaparnov as the leader, but the pattern of retreats hinted at a deeper mind. Perpelkin's dossier flashed in his memory. A sapper, a planner, a man who'd escaped before. The realization hit like a punch. This quiet man was the puppet master. At 1400, with Oman poised, Kulikov pressed the dialogue, but Perpelkin's counter was swift. He sent Zelenev with Arensky to the window, the controller's neck nicked by a shank. His voice a forced echo of the demands. The bluff teetered on the edge of collapse. Arensky's eyes pleaded, a silent signal. Kulikov saw it, a flicker of hope, but the clock forced his hand. At 14:12, the order came, storm. The assault began with a sniper shot, aimed at Fedorov, but the plan faltered. The inner grate resisted, the door held firm, and 10 agonizing minutes passed with no breach. Hope for the hostages' survival dwindled with each second, a candle guttering in the wind. Finally, the grate gave. Oman poured in, and Avakumova, half-conscious but alive, was pulled to safety. Yaremsky, however, was a different story. Found slumped, his chest marked by multiple shank wounds, a victim of the chaos. Kulikov rushed to the scene, his heart sinking as medics confirmed the controller's death. Inside, the room fell silent, a graveyard of ambition. Shaporinov, Zelenev, and Fedorov lay still, sniper shots their end. Perpelkin, slumped with a shank in his chest, drew gasps. Alive, a trickster to the last. A twist came with the autopsy. The shank in Perpelkin's chest, a self-inflicted wound to feign death, bore Yaremsky's blood. On his final moments, facing defeat, he'd turned on the man he'd promised to save, a last act of spite from a mind that never surrendered. The court later sentenced the survivors. Korolev to 15 years, Zinoviev to 13, Utkin to 6, while Perpelkin, spared by a moratorium on executions, lingered in death row's shadow, a victor in his own twisted tale. But what drove him to this? Was it survival, or a deeper hunger for control? The answer lies in the silence, a riddle Kresty will never fully unravel. The dust settled over Kresty prison like a shroud, the echo of gunfire fading into a hollow silence that clung to the stone walls, a testament to the chaos unleashed on February 23, 1992. Yuri Perpelkin, the wiry sapper who turned a desperate dream into a blood-soaked standoff, lay slumped in the duty room, a shank protruding from his chest like a jagged crown, his eyes half open with a glint that refused to die. Outside, Colonel Alexander Kulikov stood amidst the wreckage, his uniform stained with the weight of command, the air thick with the scent of cordite and regret. This wasn't just the end of an escape, it was the unraveling of a mind so twisted it bent reality itself, a tale where victory and defeat blurred into a single haunting shadow. The fortress, with its century-long tally of 5 escapes now stained by the 6th, bloodier attempt, held its breath. Was Perpelkin a martyr, a monster, or a ghost who'd outsmarted them all? Stay with me, because the final piece of this puzzle is a mirror, and you might not like what you see. The assault had been a brutal ballet, Oman forces crashing through the breached grate at 1412, their boots a thunderclap against the silence. Valentina Avakumova, the trembling controller, was yanked to safety, her half-conscious form a fragile victory snatched from the jaws of death. But Alexander Yaremsky, the second hostage, lay crumpled, his chest a map of shank wounds, a casualty of the chaos Perpelkin had sown. Kulikov rushed to the yard, his heart a drum of dread, as medics confirmed the inevitable. Yaremsky was gone, his life snuffed out in the final throes of the standoff. Inside, the duty room was a charnel house. Shaporinov, Zelenev, and Fedorov lay still, sniper shots their grim requiem, their ambitions extinguished in a hail of lead. Perpelkin, however, drew a collective gasp. Alive, despite the shank buried in his flesh, a trickster playing his last card. The twist came with the coroner's knife. The shank, a self-inflicted wound meant to feign death, bore Yaremsky's blood, a chilling revelation. In those last desperate moments, as Oman closed in, Perpelkin had turned on the man he'd promised to shield, plunging the blade into his own chest after marking Yaremsky with fatal strikes. It was a final act of spite, a sapper's precision turned inward, a man who'd rather rewrite his end than face capture. Kulikov stood over him, the weight of the day pressing down as medics marveled at the wound's shallow depth, a calculated deception that kept Perpelkin breathing, if barely. The room fell silent, a graveyard of broken dreams, the air heavy with the unspoken question. What kind of mind could orchestrate such a finale? The aftermath was a slow burn. The court convened in 1995, a somber theater where the surviving escapees faced judgment. Korolev, the rope maker, drew 15 years, his hands now chained to a different fate. Zinoviev, the farewell shouter, got 13, his voice silenced by bars. Utkin, the grenade waver, escaped with 6, his youth a fate shield. Perpelkin, the mastermind, was handed the death penalty, a sentence that should have ended him. But fate, that capricious dealer, had one last card to play. A moratorium on executions, declared in the shifting tides of Russian law, spared his neck, leaving him to rot in death row's limbo, a paradox that turned his defeat into a twisted victory. As he paced the new cell block, his eyes scanned the corridors, the sapper's memory cataloging every detail, every guard's rhythm. Was he planning again, or merely reliving that February day as a triumph etched in blood? The prison buzzed with the tale, a legend born from ruin. Perpelkin's name became a whisper among inmates, a cautionary tale of a man who dared the impossible and paid in flesh. Kulikov, haunted by Arensky's death, carried the weight of that day, his career a ledger marked by both success and loss. The press, drawn by Perpelkin's mother's call, painted a circus around Kresty, their headlines a double-edged sword that amplified the drama but offered no answers. The authorities tightened security, but the scar remained, a reminder that even the strongest walls could crack under the right pressure. But what pressure? Was it Perpelkin's cunning, or the desperation of a system crumbling under its own weight? Let's pause and peel back the layers. Perpelkin wasn't just a thief or a killer. He was a survivor, a man who turned fear into fuel. His military training gave him the edge, but it was his psychological mastery that built the team, bending Shapranov's leadership, Zelenev's rage, and Fedorov's inexperience into a single blade. The standoff exposed a flaw not just in Kresty's design, but in the human soul. How far will a man go when the noose tightens? Kulikov's restraint saved lives, but cost one, a trade-off that lingers like a bitter aftertaste. The liquor, the hostages, the press. It was a cocktail of chaos Perpelkin stirred with intent, yet his final act against Arensky hints at a darker truth. Was it vengeance, or a last grasp at control over a plan gone awry? The prison's history now bears a sixth escape attempt. Not a success, but a scar, a story that asks more questions than it answers. Why did Perpelkin risk it all, knowing the odds? Was it the death sentence looming, or a deeper hunger to prove himself among the damned? The barbed wire, the rooftop, the shank, all pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit. Some say he's a genius who outsmarted fate. Others, a madman who dragged others to their doom. The truth, buried in those final moments, is a mirror, reflecting not just Perpelkin, but the fragility of order in a world where desperation breeds legends. He walks the death row yard now, a shadow among shadows, his mind perhaps already plotting the next move. Will Kresty hold him, or will his name echo again, a ghost that refuses to rest? The answer lies in the silence, a riddle wrapped in steel, and only time will turn the key.
Don't scroll past. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready for the next twisted story.